In our psalm reading today, the psalmist says that we are to remember all that God has done. The Hebrew word for remember is used over 320 times in the Old Testament alone. And there are 16 chapters in the Old Testament just dedicated to the theme of remembering. Then when we get to the New Testament, Jesus says we're to remember the words he's spoken. To remember it's more blessed to give than to receive. And to remember him in the breaking of the bread and drinking of the cup. Now the Hebrew word for remember is zakar. Now interesting thing about that word is it means more than just to recall or bring to mind. We often think of memory as a purely mental exercise where involving the retention of information. But the biblical concept of remembrance, we'll see that remembering leads to action. The word zakar literally means not only to recall, but to do. Biblical remembrance always leads to action. I want to say that again. Biblical remembrance always leads to action. When we remember, we enter into the story and we celebrate the way people responded to God. And when that happens, we respond to God in new ways. So today we want to remember, but not just remember, we want to respond to God in new ways. God began this church with a dream, a vision. One day I was driving down a street by the duck pond in Round Rock West, and God said, you're going to start a new church, and it's going to meet in that park right there. And I thought I was crazy, and I was hearing voices in my head. But I kept having thoughts and dreams and visions of creating a church family for people who wouldn't go through the doors of a traditional church. So after working with a spiritual director and a therapist and a professor of evangelism, and getting all the appropriate approvals from the presbytery, I sent out a letter to people I knew did not participate in a faith community. I shared with them why my faith was so important to me and how being in a faith community strengthened my marriage, strengthened my family, helped me to deal with all the challenges that life brings. 38 people showed up that night, none of whom were participating in a church community. And grace began in my living room. That night, people shared a vision of what a church would look like that they might be willing to come to. We talked about having all ages involved, including children, in the entire life of the congregation. And part of that meant including leading worship, as Cannon led us in our call to worship today. We wanted a place where people could share their faith and doubts. A place where folks could dress casually. I mean, your pastor's wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans. Pretty casual. Where music was contemporary. Where we did hands-on mission. Where people were doing the ministry, not just the paid staff. Where folks had a voice. And where the church was not just a building, but the people. Neighbors invited neighbors. There were 5 families on my street that came to Grace. Co-workers invited colleagues. We had several places of work where there were several people who worked together. Family invited family. In fact, we had 4 generations of one family in the Hutcherson family. And the church grew. Part of our first mission statement was we wanted people to share their faith and doubts. And that happened most often during our weekly Bible study. More than 50 to 75% of our congregation came to weekly Bible study. I remember one night we were talking about prayer, and I asked people if they believed in prayer. And so I said, stand up if you believe 100% in prayer, and sit down if you don't believe in prayer at all. And if you kind of believe in prayer, stand in the middle, wherever you believe. Well, Wayne Granger got out of his chair and he sat down on the floor. And he said, I don't believe in prayer at all. So that night I challenged everyone to spend 1 minute in prayer every day that week and come back and share whether it made a difference. So everybody came back to Bible study. I said, well, did it make a difference? And people are telling stories, and Wayne's just, and he's, and finally said, okay, it made a difference. Bible study was core to our early days. People wanted to learn the biblical story. In fact, I remember that first Valentine's Day, several of the couples bought each other Bibles because they wanted a Bible to be able to read for our Bible study. A few years later, we began Disciple Bible Study, which is a 34-week commitment to read through the entire Bible. And we did that for about 6 or 7 years, and there was Disciple 1, then Disciple 2. In our Disciple 1 class, we had about 30 people each time for 6 or 7 years. Then we began countless small groups. When J.T. Fields first came to Grace, he hadn't been to church since the age of 18, and he was just under 60 years old. I asked him to be in a small group. He said, "Now, Nancy, I told you I'm just sticking my big toe in. Back off. I'll get there. I'm not going to be in a small group. I'll read along with what you preach about, but that's it." That year I handed out a brochure for folks to read through the entire Bible in a year, and he did it. And I loved getting his phone calls. I'll never forget one day, I answered the phone and he immediately said, "You got to be kidding me. 400 foreskins is a dowry? That's in the Bible?" I think he was shocked as Carl was when there were such racy things there. When Carl first started reading the Bible, he came to me and asked me if I had ever read it. And did I know there was sex in there? I've always teased him that that's why he comes to Bible study. Reading the scripture together and learning new things, sharing faith and doubts. Are people still doing that today? Yes. We have small groups that meet just about every day of the week. And some folks participate in several. I think Mike Lorenzen participates in the most. He goes to the Monday evening reunion group, the Wednesday morning reunion group, the Wednesday night men's Bible study, the Thursday night small group, and Sunday morning Sunday school. I think he wants to learn. Youth were very important from our early days. Our youth invited their friends. I remember having a lock-in at the old house we had in downtown Round Rock. The neighborhood was in disrepair as before things were fixed up in downtown Round Rock. And the house we were living in was really in disrepair. And I had the middle schoolers up there all night long. About midnight, we were plunged into darkness. And we were scared. Well, then we heard laughter outside. And yes, it was my boys, Matt and Chris, and all their other senior high friends who had come and flipped the breaker on us because they thought it would be really funny. Our youth had fun together and explored their faith and doubts together. And they led our congregation into mission. An important part of Grace has always been mission. We've always given 10% of our income to mission, and we collected food for the food pantry, and we sold tamales for Hermanos de Cristo, and then we'd send our youth on mission trips so our youth could get their hands dirty, but we would just write the check and support them. But soon, the entire congregation became involved in hands-on mission. We were feeding the homeless, getting to know the homeless, giving hugs to the homeless, handing out clothing to them, giving them gifts at Christmas filled with socks, underwear, gloves, and hats. We started leading a worship service at a nursing home. We adopted families for Christmas. We made blankets for those undergoing chemotherapy. We mentored students at Voigt Elementary and drove elderly to doctor's appointments. We worked at both the Round Rock Area Serving Center and the Caring Place in Georgetown. People were giving of their time and their energy, not just writing a check, but getting to know people face to face and sharing the love of Christ in very tangible ways. From our first days of worship in the park, we always said the church is not a building, and we did live that out. Grace has had quite a few homes over the years, from the park where you had to bring your own chair to worship, to the 100-year-old home, to the funeral home where I always had to call Sunday afternoon to see if they had a body there, because if they did, we couldn't meet in the funeral home, to the field out back of this farmhouse. This was all open land, and there was just the farmhouse, and we would sit in beds of pickup trucks for worship. To the old farmhouse garage. As it got cold, we moved into the garage, and the garage door would go up and down depending on how hot or cold it was in there that day. We did not have air conditioning in there, and I'll never forget when Carl and Kathleen's mother visited and came to worship one time, and we had no air conditioning in there. It was for a Good Friday service, I think. And after that, she wrote us a check and said, "Get some window units." Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jesus. But the day came when we wanted to build a building, and we dreamed dreams and we raised money, but we only raised pledges of $200,000 over 3 years. And the price tag was $840,000 to build. Should we do it? We stepped out on faith and we did it, and everybody said we were crazy. We took a huge leap of faith, and then at our groundbreaking, the Gonzales Presbyterian Church gave us $100,000. Right after that, the PCUSA gave us a 7-year grant of $180,000. God was affirming that we were doing the right thing, and God's timing was perfect. A few years later, we wanted to build an educational building, but $1.8 million seemed really steep. But God gave us 3 portables for a total of $25,000. Again, another miracle. Then there was that Martin Luther King holiday when a 14-year-old arsonist set fire to the church house and practically destroyed it. But this congregation came together and we rebuilt not only the house, but our faith. And we offered forgiveness to the teenager, which made a huge public statement in this community. And soon the house met our needs much more effectively. You know, God has always taken care of us and blessed us in miraculous ways. And over again, every year on our birthday, we've remembered why we came together and remembered the countless ways God has touched our lives and been with us. And that act of remembrance has called us into action. And the church has grown, not just numerically, but spiritually. Now, over the past few weeks, we've been thinking about building on the past and believing in the future, exploring how we will live out our mission statement of loving God, growing faith, and serving Christ. So we've asked several people to share their memories of why they stayed at Grace and how they've seen the love of God and how they've grown. So let's watch this video of that.
Why Grace? Connie and I first attended worship at Grace 22 years ago when worship was outside on the grass by the old farmhouse. We were immediately impressed by Pastor Nancy and were warmly welcomed by the other worshipers. With 2 pastors now and many more members, Grace is still basically the same. Meaningful worship and friendly, supportive members.
Grace Presbyterian Church is a nice place, and it has nice people, and they also treat you like a family. And if you join and you're a new person and you have kids, they can go to kids club too.
I came to Grace because I knew Pastor Nancy. I stayed at Grace because it feels like home.
And I don't have to dress up.
The reason I come to Grace is because these are my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. Hook 'em.
I was asked what I've learned at Grace about loving God. And I'm reminded of what Paul says in 1 John, that we love because he first loved us. He goes on to say that we cannot love God unless we love our brothers and sisters. What Grace has taught me was the importance of loving everyone, no matter who they are or what they are. I think that Grace exemplifies this in the way that all people are welcome here and all the outreach that our congregation does in the community.
Grace has taught me that I show my love of God in everything that I do, whether it's saying hello, giving a hug, singing a praise song, or raising my hand in praise to God. All I do is done in the love of God.
Coming to Grace has taught me that the more I know God, the more I spend time with Him in worship, prayer, and praising Him with fellow Christians, the easier it is for me to love Him. Just like the song we always sing at Grace says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength." Being at Grace around other Christians has given me opportunities to share God's love with others.
Grace has taught me that you should love God because He's always going to forgive you and give you a lot more chances. And He loves you, so it's kind of fair for you to love Him.
Grace has helped me grow in faith by being part of a growing church and by witnessing the amazing things that God has done through this church and through these people. I was here when we stepped out in faith to purchase this property, even when we weren't sure we could afford it. And I watched one of my Grace family remove his own socks to give to a homeless person at Angel House. Being part of this community of faith makes my own personal faith stronger every day.
Grace has increased my faith basically due to the amount of faith that the members of Grace have and what God will provide for them and how God provides for this church.
Grace Presbyterian Church has helped me understand the basic fundamentals of what it means to be Presbyterian. By bringing me back to the beginnings of the church in Sunday schools and in sermons, I have learned lessons such as how to treat your neighbor and how the doubts and differences can be the strengths of the church.
In the time that I've been with Grace Presbyterian Church, I've been involved with many small groups. From leading to participating, this has challenged me to explore my faith. And with the diverse group of people that we have at Grace, it's been amazing to watch the foundation of my faith grow, experience its maturity, and create a closer bond with the people here at Grace.
Wow. Those are some pretty incredibly amazing and inspiring words, aren't they? Yeah. You know, remembering is a powerful tool for empowerment and for change and for faith. Whether we are remembering something that was maybe hurtful or harmful or tragic or something beautiful, such as the birthday of a church. Remembering inspires us to heal and to grow and to find hope in all of life. Just like 1999 was a powerful year to remember for Grace, it was a pretty big year of memories for me as well. I remember in 1999, the biggest news story was the Y2K bug and how it was going to destroy all of our computers. I remember that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was the top TV show, and people were going to the theater in droves to see Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. I remember anxiously awaiting to get my hands on the copy of the newest, greatest bestseller, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I remember 1999, all too well, was the year of the Columbine shootings, and 12 people were killed and 27 were injured when the Aggie bonfire collapsed. I remember I had also completed my seminary and landed a job and was standing both excited and terrified on the cusp of a new future in ministry. And I remember the gossip about this radical female preacher in Round Rock who was doing what most people deemed impossible. She was building a church that went against everything normal and traditional that a Presbyterian church should do and be. Yes, my friends, you have not known me for 20 years, but I have known you since your infancy. I remember I was both in awe and terrified of Nancy and the risks she was taking for Christ's church. Nancy was bold and she was strong, and more than anything, she trusted God. She held herself as a leader and a shepherd with confidence in and amongst all the gossip. And yes, friends, most of that gossip was not good. In fact, many said what she was going to do would fail. It was impossible, and she was downright crazy for ever believing it could be achieved. Still, Nancy and the disciples whom God surrounded her with believed more in the faith-filled possibilities for Grace than all the impossible scenarios that were being thrown at them. Aren't we glad Nancy and those 94 first disciples believed more in coming together as a light to the world than simply going about living their everyday lives? Which brings me to our second lesson of the day. And it includes some of my favorite words from Jesus because they hold so much encouragement and challenge for us. Today we hear Jesus say to his followers, you are the light of the world. You are the city on the hill. You are a light that cannot be hidden. Can you imagine that? Here was a motley crew of nobodies. Farmers and fishermen and tax collectors and prostitutes and housewives and sons and daughters that lived in a little tiny poor village in a remote, obscure part of the world. And Jesus believed in them enough to say, you are the light of the world. Talk about a statement of faith for them. Well, friends, welcome to the motley crew. By the world's standards, we are not anything different than those first believers so long ago. We are not a peach tree. We are not Covenant. We are not Westminster, where we have thousands of members, a massive sanctuary and state-of-the-art buildings. But we too have two amazing monitors. Thank you to your generosity. Two, finally. But you know what? More than anything, we are a family that loves Jesus, and we love his church, and we love one another, and we love the community around us, and in his eyes, that is what matters. And I believe that Jesus is charging us today saying, Grace, you are the light of the world. You are the city on the hill, and you gotta let your light shine. As I stood over there in the courtyard this week, looking out just over the property, I marveled at how 20 years ago, God and the founders of this family of faith chose to literally build a church on a hill in a sleepy town place called Round Rock, having no idea what this property would look like 20 years later. With very little cash and a whole lot of faith, they came together in unity to build a place that would become a beacon of light in the neighborhood, not hidden away, but out there for the world to see. Did you know that today there are more than 700 people who set foot on this campus each week, and countless beautiful souls are changed to Christ through our worship and through our study and through our service? A few minutes ago, we saw some beautiful reflections that illuminated the light of why grace. How has grace shown you the love of God, and how has grace helped you grow in faith? Now let's hear a few more about how we are the light of the world through our service, as well as some dreams for the next 20 years.
At Grace, we take seriously Jesus' call to take care of the least of these. We live out being the hands of Christ by making blankets for cancer patients and by pushing wheelchairs to worship at Trinity. Our feet travel to Angel House to serve a meal, or to the coast to rebuild a flooded home. We have abundant opportunities to serve, and we are rewarded with abundant life.
I know Christ is in Grace when I walk through the Grace doors and I feel the love of the Grace family racing through my heart.
How did I see the hands of Christ through the people at Grace? The Easter egg hunt comes to mind. My grandkids really loved it, and they got the beautiful biblical stories.
Places I've seen Christ at Grace is when we hang out, or when we help out with Angel House, and when we just help people in general.
I have seen Christ's hands at work here at Grace. The most profound experience was when I had 4 family members pass away in the time span of 18 months. The love and support, the cards, the meals we received from everyone at Grace was so sincere from the heart. That's what truly helped us make it through those hard times.
Hi, I was attracted to come here to Grace because of the diversity, and I would like to see us grow with more outreach and increase in our diversity.
In 20 years, I see Grace as having a bigger youth group and a greater outreach.
Happy birthday, Grace Presbyterian. I can't believe it's been 20 years, and we have 20 years to look forward to. Where I see this church going over the next 20 years, wow, the opportunities are unlimited. Grace Presbyterian happens to sit on one of the most amazing and beautiful pieces of land. The buildings are beautiful, and the congregation is beautiful as well. I see us expanding our programs, including the Holy Moly Club, expanding our outreach into the community, and helping those in need. And if we continue to do that, Grace will be around the next 20 years, and for a lot longer after that.
I just love all of these. And I'm sure we have tons more memories that we can talk about over an amazing lunch, because you know Presbyterians do like to eat. But people of Grace, we are the light of the world. We are the city on the hill shining for the world to see. May these words today inspire us as we begin to discern how we are going to live into the next 20 years of life, loving God, growing faith, and serving Christ. You know, every single day, I pray that the Spirit will continue to explode in the hearts of all who gather here, daring us to even greater and deeper acts of discipleship as a church. And may we become, as a church, more dedicated to Christ's mission in the world than ever. May this October 27th, 2019, become a day where remembering meets dreaming, where tradition meets vision, where building on the past meets believing in the future. Friends, Grace is a city on the rise. It is Jesus' city on the hill. And may his blessings, his amazing, faithful blessings that have been with us for 20 years, to continue to blanket us for the next 20 years as we continue to grow even brighter and more vibrant as a city on the hill, piercing the darkness of this world with his light and inviting people, hey, come on in, come on home. Let us pray. God of building on the past and believing in the future, we thank you for the many gracious acts of love, grace, and salvation you have given this family of faith for 20 years. Continue to bless us with your presence as you come to us in worship and music, in education and fellowship, in your word and sacraments. Light your fire within us and make us a city on the hill, a light that cannot be hidden, that others might know and come and learn of your great love. Amen.